Hello, lovely RIMPA people. Hello. There's not many people in here, but I'm going to do my thing anyway. And maybe a few more people will come in because our timings are a little bit different there. Really pleased to be here. And I'm wondering, looking out at you, and hello to those of you dialing in, I wonder what you were like when you were a child. Were you a bit funny? Maybe a bit cheeky? Maybe a bit shy? So you heard that intro from Cam, but let me tell you that I was a timid kid. I was the sort of kid that saw monsters everywhere. And in fact, I remember one day my family took us on a picnic to a place called Webster's Lookout. And I turned to my mum and said, "What's a Webster?" My little brain read the sign there as Webster's Lookout. So I was a shy kid and really not somebody that you would expect to grow up into a person that would have any level of influence. I spent a lot of time in my room listening to the radio, and in that case, it was the music of the 70s. We tend to gravitate towards the decade of the music when we were young. Yeah? Raise your hand if that resonates. Yep, absolutely, you're with me. I love it. Now, to this day, if there's an opportunity to dress up in 70s gear, I'm there. So this is me with my husband, Mike. In reality, he looks a bit more like a mature Scandinavian backpacker than a 70s porn star, which is probably a good thing. Anyway, that's another story. And I know I'm seriously dating myself here. It's interesting because generally I work and speak at the leading edge of AI and credibility these days, but we've got to pay respect to where we've come from, don't we? Because it's the years and the decades in between that have got us to where we are and the credibility that we have. So, 70s music. Now, we're a small crowd, but I think an enthusiastic one. Because the thing that I love the most about 70s music, and I'm talking specifically about 70s rock music here, is that they have these gutsy guitar riffs. And you can identify a 70s song, pretty much a rock song anyway, from the opening chords. Are you with me? Oh, please, help me out here. I'm doing it tough. Look at the room. So let's put this to the test. I'm going to play a song, and when you know it and the band, yell it out. Now, normally I have prizes, but I thought I'd have a big audience today, so I didn't bring prizes. We could have all had a prize here. That's okay. All right, so yell it out when you know this one. The first one's easy. Come on. Smoke on the water. Okay, I'm dying up here. All right, here we go. Little one closer to home. Thanks, Cam. Am I ever going to see your face again? Don't say the next bit. All right, now the third one's a bit more obscure. I wonder if anybody will get this. Let's see how you go. Any takers? It's actually not Barracuda, but it sounds very similar. It's Queen, Keep Yourself Alive. Very first song from their very first album. And it actually featured in the movie Bohemian Rhapsody. So of all the 70s bands, I loved Queen the most. And I was obsessed with Freddie Mercury. Now, not Freddie with the moustache and the yellow jacket. I'm talking about original Freddie with the long hair and the satin pants. Anybody with me? Yeah? Because I was fascinated. I could tell as soon as you walked in, I picked you as a Freddie fan. I was fascinated by Freddie's story that this skinny kid with buck teeth, who nobody thought would amount to much, went on to become this incredible performer. And in fact, I used to tell Freddie's story in my keynotes, and then the movie came out, and now everybody knows his story. Amazing. And that really gave me inspiration as a shy kid. I thought, if he could do that, what could I do? See, when I was in my teens, I spent about 4 years being treated for a condition called scoliosis. You heard of that? Sideways curvature of the spine. When I was 17, I had major surgery, and I was in a full body cast from my neck to my hips for 6 months. I literally went back into my shell. But you know, having looked at Freddie and all those amazing performers, I thought, I'm not going to let this get the better of me. And I made the choice that I'm going to start putting myself out there into situations where I've got to have influence, where I've got to step outside my comfort zone and be more confident. And that's what I did over subsequent years. Eventually, I became a TV reporter. The amazing thing, Cam, you'll relate to this, about being a TV journo in the late 80s and 90s, you have a video documentary of your marvellous hairstyles. And then when the Olympics rolled around in 2000, I got a gig as an announcer at the Sydney Olympics. There I am in the Olympic hockey stadium, and now I'm speaking to an audience of 20,000 with millions watching on television. Talk about an influence moment. And I can still remember my very first game at the hockey that I had to announce. I was so excited because Australia were playing, the men's team. One of my jobs was to introduce the players as they ran out onto the pitch. And then I found out who they were playing. Poland. Anybody here of Polish descent? If you do, you'll know that Polish names have a lot of consonants. Not a lot of vowels in between. I think I can still remember some of them. Robert Zgubczak, Tomasz Hobjaj, and my favourite, Evgeniusz Gotkowski. It's implanted in my brain. So I remember that very first game. The producer starts counting me in, 10, 9, 8, and I'm hanging onto the desk because that was the only thing that was stopping me from passing out in fright. And he got to 3, 2, 1, and I'm supposed to be saying something at that point. And I just froze. It felt like for about half an hour, but it was probably only a couple of seconds. Because luckily, my training and my practice kicked in. Next thing, the Olympic fanfare was playing. I took a breath and I was underway. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Sydney 2000 Olympic Games. So let me ask you, have you ever had a moment like that? When you've been on centre stage, it may not have been at an Olympic stadium or up on a literal stage, but in your role, particularly at the moment, with records and information management being front and centre of so many discussions in government agencies, councils and businesses, have you had a moment where you've needed to have influence, speaking to your executive team, dealing with a tricky issue in your own team, having a one-on-one with a colleague that's not going well? That's your centre stage where you've dried up. You haven't had the influence that you've wanted to have. And so I want to share with you some of the tools and techniques that I've learned the hard way over the years, clawing my way out of being this recovering shy person. I want to share 3 things in particular, but starting with this concept, and this is something that you will already know, but it's so important to remember, that if you want to be truly influential on centre stage, whatever that means for you, that influence has to ignite. That ignition has to come from inside you. There's nothing that we can do really to plaster that on from the outside, but that's often where we start. So I want to share 3 key lessons just very quickly, give you some food for thought. Before I do that, I want to tell you about the most amazing experience I had in 2020 when I worked with this man. Now you might recognise him. General Angus Campbell, the Chief of our Defence Force. And you might remember that in November 2020, General Campbell had to take centre stage and deliver a really difficult piece of news to the Australian people and a global audience. And some of our most elite soldiers, allegedly, had been guilty of committing war crimes. Now, when I got that engagement to work with him, I had terrible imposter syndrome that he's the Chief of Defence. What am I going to teach him? What an incredible man, and for a leader at that level to be coachable, to realise that this was so important, this message on centre stage, where he had to have influence. He couldn't leave it to chance. Now, you might remember there was a lot of negative speculation leading up to the release of this information. Media saying, defence are going to duck and weave and blame others and not take full responsibility. And I remember, perhaps you watched that live stream, or perhaps you saw it on the news later, thousands and thousands of people did. The auditorium was packed in Canberra where he delivered his address, live streamed, many, many thousands of people. And I could tell the minute his boots hit the stage in that room, because the clicking of the camera shutters sounded like hail on a tin roof. And he stepped out into the spotlight on centre stage. What was incredible to me was the comments from hard-nosed journalists after that. Expecting it to be negative, the ABC referred to him as a dignified and compelling figure. Fairfax said he received praise for his transparent report launch. The Australian said he presented as a highly credible voice. That was amazing. And in my experience, that was a first. It was the first time that I'd worked with someone where we Aussies hadn't shot the messenger. We'd taken really difficult news and we hadn't blamed the person. I know it's controversial and it's still going on, but I'm talking about this actual announcement. I reckon most people looked at that and said, well, that was a terrible thing to have to hear, but didn't that bloke do a good job of communicating it? So this is my message to you. Whatever your role, whether you're in a council or another government agency or a business and not-for-profit, whatever it is in your role, at this crucial time in our history, you can have all the influence you need by taking some of these insights. And I want to share these, and this is what General Campbell and I worked on. And the first one is this. If you want to have influence, whether it's in a meeting, a conversation, speaking to a bigger group, you have to make it about what's most important to them. Didn't you love Gus this morning, his story about Lonely Planet and TripAdvisor and the difference, because one got what their audience really needed. This is where we have to start. And every one of my points is going to have a Queen reference, because that's the way I roll. We've got to get inside the minds of the people we're communicating with. Now, for you, that's a little bit complex, because think about people in your organisation. We've gone through this traumatic experience over the last 3 years. We've got all those legacy issues. And really, so many of our familiar paradigms have been turned upside down. Life is very different, isn't it? It's like the pandemic opened this gate and to so much other change. And that's given rise to so many shifts in behaviours and attitudes, and it's hard to keep up. And at the very heart of it, so many people in your organisation are doing it very tough right now. We know that mental health statistics bear that out. So think about this for you. If you're needing to have influence, your audience isn't going to necessarily be very tuned in to start with. You're going to have to really make it about them to get them to listen. And the problem with that is, most of us, when we communicate, we push a message out and expect it to land. A bit like this woman, you know, at a gym, she's got one of those contraptions with the really heavy weights. She's pushing it across the gym floor. Now, I know what you're thinking. I've got to get myself another tat. No, I don't know what you're thinking. Anyway, but you get the concept. That's what so many leaders do, and that's what so many people do. But that's not going to be effective. Reminds me of a friend of mine, Warren, goes by Wazza, who works on construction sites. And often he has to go to site and has to do a safety induction. You know what I mean? You get there and it's, it goes for a couple of hours, it's really boring, he's heard it all before, it's just a box-ticking exercise, but it has to be done. And he was telling me that a couple of weeks ago, same thing, he had to go to a big construction site, had to do another safety induction, half a day. So he went to there's a makeshift classroom on the site, and he walked in, and there were 11 other people in there waiting for it to start. Nobody was speaking, everybody was looking very dejected at having to be there. Next thing, the trainer comes in, doesn't make eye contact, just launches into this droning spiel. And a little way in, the trainer says, I hope everybody's got their construction cards so you can work on site. And people are kind of going, and reaching into their pockets and holding up their cards, and he keeps going. An hour and a half in, 90 minutes into the session, it emerged that 11 of the 12 people being trained, my friend Wazza being the only exception, spoke only Spanish. Only Spanish. So here's a tip. If you want to have influence in your organisation, you need to make sure you're speaking the same language as your audience. Literally, that helps. But you know what I'm saying here? You need to be speaking the same language and framing it for them. This is one of my favourite quotes when it comes to communication from social researcher Hugh Mackay. It's the message people take away, not the message we send, that determines our success as a communicator. Just let that land for a sec. What's the message people take away when you communicate? Are you framing it for them, and are they taking the message away, or is it all about you pushing the message out? So that's the first thing, frame it for them. Second lesson is this. to have influence, you must learn to manage your personal state. And you might think, well, what does she mean by that? This isn't a personal development session. But so often, we leave that outside in our professional lives, but we need to manage what's going on inside of us. You know, when I started working with really senior leaders, first of all, I used to think that the higher you rose in an organisation, your self-doubts just kind of melted away. And of course, I realised that in fact the opposite is the case. But really outstanding leaders have all the same self-doubts as many of us have, and yet in those crucial moments when they've got to have influence on centre stage, they put those aside and focus on the job that needs to be done, whether that's for 10 minutes, an hour, a day, whatever it takes. And sometimes that goes to the very essence of their breath. They're managing their personal state. Now, the reality is we humans are like Russian dolls. You know, the dolls within the dolls within the dolls. We've got our outer shell, which is, you know, the facade that we show to the outside world when we're on our best behaviour, like when you're meeting people at a conference for the first time. You've got layers of dolls within that where you allow people in depending on how much you trust them. But we've got the inner doll, the little one right on the inside. That's your personal realm of communication. The conversations you have only with yourself, maybe out loud. But would you agree that it's those conversations that are the engine room fueling everything else about the impact that you have? We can't plaster that on the outside. It's got to come from inside. And so many of us are more concerned with what other people think about us than the job that has to be done and the impact we need to have. So you've got to manage your personal state. Now you might be thinking, but how? But how? Maybe you recognise this amazing athlete, Emma McKeon, our most medalled Olympian. Don't you love the way we murder the English language? She's a Wollongong girl like me, and I saw her interviewed not long after Tokyo. She's actually very shy and reticent herself. And the interviewer said to her, Emma, let's think about the 100-metre freestyle final, blue ribbon event at the Olympics. You're up in the blocks, you've got the reigning Olympic world champion in the pool, everybody's at their absolute peak, everybody wants to win, you are not the favourite. You did win. Why? Pretty good question, isn't it? She really thought about it. She didn't just rattle off an answer. She really considered. And she went on to explain that the reason she won was that for the first time in that event, she was able to manage her personal state. She managed what was going on inside her. She said for the first time she truly believed that she would win that race. And she explained that she and her coach came up with a word that they used throughout the Olympics. And the word for them was unwavering. So when the media put pressure on her, I'm unwavering. When her opponents tried to psych her out, I'm unwavering. When the bus was late taking her to an event, I'm unwavering. I'm unwavering. Now you know this. You know the power of feeding that inner doll information that's going to help you have influence from the inside. It worked for Emma. Maybe it'll work for you too. You've got other tools at your disposal, and it'll be different for each of us. Some people like to meditate, like to do all sorts of things, like to visualise, to get in the zone before you've got to go into a meeting where you have influence. At its most basic, it's about your breathing. Breathing's kind of healthy. It's good for you. But you've got to make sure you're breathing properly. Do you know what I mean by that? Breathing properly? There's only a few of us here, and you look like a trustworthy bunch. So do this with me. Would you please take one hand, any hand, either hand, and place it on your stomach. I can't see you. No one's looking at you. Place the other hand just on the top of your chest. And just take a few breaths in and out. And what I'd like you to do is notice which of your hands is moving more. The hand on your stomach, the hand on your chest. People dialing in do the same. And, or maybe both evenly. Raise your hand if the hand on your stomach is moving more. Do you have a few of you? Raise your hand if the hand on your chest is moving more. Yeah? And what about if they're about the same? Yeah? Okay. So the correct answer, and there is one, is the hand on your stomach. So when you're under stress, when you're really needing to have influence, when you're on centre stage, that's the time you need to be breathing down into your abdomen. You can practice this because that's connecting with the part of your central nervous system that's keeping you calm when you need to be on. As opposed to if you're breathing up into your chest, which most of us do when we're under stress, you're in a meeting and somebody's getting a bit hot under the collar, your brain is saying, I've got to either leave this or I've got to punch them before they try to kill me. It's probably not what you want. So that's something you can do. Take that away and practice. There's lots of, just Google it, lots of websites with practicing abdominal breathing, something very practical you can do. So frame it from their point of view, manage your personal state. Now we focus on the content. And I suggest you look at this last. So often when we've got to have influence, we're just bursting in and thinking about what am I going to say. Do that last. Focus on them first and your state. Because you then want to get to a point where you've got shared meaning with what you want to say and the person receiving it and understanding it. And I'm not going to spend much time at all on this point. I'm going to go into this a bit more tomorrow because I'm doing an hour-long session tomorrow. But its very core, the simple message is this. If you're going to have impact and influence when you communicate, you've got to be prepared. You've got to be ready. Sometimes this takes a second to sink in, this image. Because the fact is, if I were to say to you, okay, the first speaker after lunch, their flight's been cancelled, not that that would ever happen, and you're up, you've got to fill the slot. Probably during lunch, you would do some preparation, I'd suggest. You'd take that quite seriously. But would you agree that when you've got a conversation or a small group meeting where you need to have influence, we don't always afford that the same respect in terms of preparation. We tend to wing it and waffle. Can you relate? So preparing, even for those conversations when the stakes are higher, is critical. And you might be thinking, well, Neryl, I've got no time to prepare. I've got back-to-back meetings throughout the day. And I want to suggest that you've always got time. It could be 30 seconds when you walk from one meeting to the next, or when you jump out of one Teams call and go into the next. That's when you need to take the time to go through this process. And I encourage you to use a structure. Whenever you've got to have influence and put a point of view out there, use a framework, use a structure, don't wing it and waffle. Tomorrow I'm going to take you through one of these simplest structures of all, ABC 1, 2, 3. You've probably heard it, but I wonder if you're doing it. Get their attention, break your content into 3 bites, give them a call to action. I'm going to give you more on that tomorrow. So Freddie Mercury went from being a shy kid to being arguably the most incredible showman we've ever seen. So how did he do that? And what can we take from that so that you can have more influence when you're on centre stage in your meetings and communications? Well, exactly what we've just talked about. He focused on them. He connected with his audience. He always focused on the audience. If you want a masterclass in somebody connecting with an audience, have a look at one of his concerts. He definitely managed his personal state. He literally performed at his best when he was dying. He put himself to one side and focused on the job. And he mastered the content. He mastered the it of what he was saying. So this is your framework, TMI. And you probably thought that that used to stand for too much information. Well, I want to reframe that now into them, me, and it. That's really going to help you have more influence. So for you, I wonder what you're going to take from all of this, whether it's this session, whether it's the other fantastic sessions we've had this morning, yesterday, and the sessions still to come. Because, you know, you might be thinking, well, I've heard this, I know this. Maybe you've heard it. Have you learnt it? Have you internalized it? Have you embodied it? Because that's how you make transformational change. That's how you have more influence. Sometimes we don't have a choice with change. Sometimes change is forced upon us. And I learned this the hard way back in 2010 when I got a phone call that changed everything. And it was to tell me that my husband Mike had been involved in a really serious dirt biking accident. We nearly lost him at the scene. He was airlifted by helicopter to Sydney, Both legs were smashed, multiple spinal injuries, head injury, major internal injuries. And that was the start of a very long road to recovery. Now, part of that recovery involved him taking up a new sport, which was ocean surf ski paddling to build up his upper body. And he was terrible at it at first, but over time he got better and better. And one day he said to me, Neryl, I want to set a goal. I am going to make the Australian team in the Masters category and compete at the World Championships, which were coming up in about 18 months' time. And we both fell about laughing because it was just so ridiculous. He could hardly walk. And I started to refer to that as our giggly goal because it was just so far-fetched. But he worked towards it. Every day, every week, he did something that would take him towards that goal, and he got better and better. So fast forward about 12 months, the Australian team announcement came out, and he was selected. He made it onto the Australian team to go to the World Championships. So off we went. Went off to Hong Kong, huge event, huge seas, very dramatic. All the competitors looked like drowned rats. You couldn't tell who was in which age group and who came where. But when it came time for the medals ceremony, Mike got a tap on the shoulder because not only had he made the Australian team, he'd won the bronze medal in his age group at the World Championships. So I want you to look at this image on the screen, and instead of seeing Mike, I invite you to transport yourself into that image. The image on the left, instead of seeing Mike broken in hospital, I want you to think of something that's been your greatest challenge. What's got in the way of you having the level of influence that you really want or need to have in your role? Could be something at work, could be a person, could be a situation. It could be something between your own ears that stopped you from having the influence. It could be something not related to work at all. But now I want you to look at that image on the right-hand side. Mike up on the podium in the Australian uniform, the medal around his neck, the anthems playing, the crowd going wild, the flags going up. And I invite you to think about what's a moment of triumph for you where you're going to have the influence that you want. Maybe it's something that's already happened. Maybe it's something that's yet to happen. But you can be there, like me, chipping away, applying the tools, building your influence, and you can certainly achieve that. Because if I learn anything from this experience, it's this. Anything's possible. Absolutely anything is possible. I wish you every success as you continue to do wonderful work in your organisation and building your influence. Have an amazing rest of the conference, and I hope to see many of you in my session tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me.